The enslaved man who replaced the husband in bed for 10 years she never knew. Virginia, 1805. In Virginia, 1805, the nights were quiet, but one house never truly slept. When the master fell ill and stopped sharing his wife's room, a strange silence filled the halls. No one noticed the soft steps of an enslaved man moving after midnight. No one asked why the lady of the house began to stand taller by day and cry less by night. For 10 years, a secret lived behind closed doors. A secret built on trust, fear, and a bond that was never meant to exist. This is the story of how one hidden choice changed many lives forever. This story takes place on a tobacco plantation near the James River. The land looked peaceful, but pain lived deep in its soil. The enslaved people worked from dawn to dark, watched by sharp eyes and ruled by old laws. At the center of the house lived Eleanor Whitmore, the master's wife, young but already lonely. Among the enslaved men was Samuel, quiet, careful, and known for his steady hands. If you enjoy deep, emotional history stories like this, please like, share, and subscribe to Old Candle Stories for more unforgettable tales. The Whitmore plantation stood tall with white columns and wide porches, proud on the outside, fragile within. Master Henry Whitmore had once been a strong man, loud and sure of himself, but sickness changed him. By 1805, he stayed mostly in his room, his voice thin, his temper dull. His wife, Eleanor, was left alone in a house full of people yet empty of comfort. Samuel belonged to the fields, but he was often called to the house. He fixed doors, carried wood, and kept his eyes low. He had been born on the land and learned early how to survive by listening more than speaking. Eleanor noticed him because he never stared, never rushed, and never spoke unless asked. At night, Eleanor sat awake, hearing her husband breathe in pain through the wall. Fear and loneliness pressed on her chest. One stormy evening, she rang the bell for help. By chance, Samuel answered. That night, nothing improper happened. Only words were shared. But something unseen began to form. Neither of them knew how deep this path would go or how long the secret would last. After that stormy night, things did not return to how they were before. Eleanor tried to tell herself it was nothing, just a talk, just a moment of weakness. Yet when days passed, she found herself watching the hallway more closely, listening for Samuel's steps. Samuel felt it too. He did not have words for it, only a tight feeling in his chest. He knew the rules of the world he lived in. He knew how dangerous it was to be noticed in the wrong way. Still, when the bell rang again late one night, his feet moved before his mind could stop them. Eleanor sat by the fire, wrapped in a shawl. Her husband had been asleep for hours, lost in his illness. She did not ask Samuel to sit. She did not need to. Silence filled the room, heavy but calm. "You don't fear me," she said softly, almost to herself. Samuel kept his eyes on the floor. "Fear keeps a man alive, ma'am." She studied him then, not as property, not as help, but as a person who breathed and thought and felt pain. That was new to her, and it shook something loose inside her. From that night on, Samuel was called more often, sometimes to bring tea, sometimes just to stand near the door. They spoke little at first, small words, safe words, but loneliness has a way of pulling truth out of people. Eleanor spoke of her youth, of coming to the plantation as a bride, full of hope. She spoke of how fast that hope faded. Samuel spoke less, but when he did, his words were simple and honest. He spoke of his mother, sold away when he was young, of learning to stay quiet to survive. Their bond did not grow from desire at first. It grew from listening. Weeks turned into months. The house staff began to notice Samuel's frequent presence, but no one questioned the mistress. The overseer's son, Thomas, watched closely. He was young, sharp-eyed, and eager to prove himself. He noticed how Samuel was treated differently, how he was never shouted at, never rushed. One night, Eleanor broke down. Her husband had shouted at her earlier, confused and angry from pain. She shook as she cried, tears soaking her sleeves. Without thinking, Samuel stepped closer. His hand hovered, unsure. "Please," she whispered. Just stay. That night, Samuel did not leave when the fire burned low. He sat near her chair until dawn. Nothing more happened. Yet when he rose to go, Eleanor reached for his sleeve. Her touch was light, trembling. Samuel froze. That was the moment the line blurred. From then on, the nights changed. Eleanor began to wait for him. Samuel began to feel pulled between fear and care. He knew what could happen if they were discovered. He knew stories. Whippings. Still, when Eleanor looked at him with tired eyes full of trust, he stayed. The first time he shared her bed, it was not planned. Eleanor had fainted from exhaustion. Samuel helped her lie down, meant to leave, but she clutched his arm, calling his name like a prayer. He stayed, sitting at first, then lying beside her, stiff with fear. Nothing improper happened that night. Only closeness. Only warmth. But the next time, and the time after that, the space between them disappeared. Eleanor told herself she had no choice. Her husband no longer touched her, no longer saw her. Samuel told himself he was protecting her. Both lies were easier than the truth. Years passed quietly. The secret settled into routine. Samuel returned to the fields by day, carrying his silence like a shield. By night, he became something else entirely. A comfort, a presence, a stand-in for a man who was still alive but no longer there. Eleanor never spoke of love. Samuel never asked for freedom. Their bond lived in the dark, where it was safer. But secrets grow heavy over time. And Thomas, the overseer's son, was watching more closely than they realized. The calm they believed in was already cracking, even if they could not yet hear the sound. The night everything broke open began like many others. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that made every sound feel louder than it was. Samuel moved through the hallway with care, his bare feet knowing each board by memory. He believed, foolishly, that the secret was still safe. Inside the bedroom, Eleanor waited. Her face looked older now, lined by years of worry and hidden nights. Master Henry slept in the next room, breathing shallow, unaware of how much life had passed him by. Samuel sat beside Eleanor, their shoulders touching. Neither spoke. They had learned that words were dangerous. Silence felt safer. Then a sound came from the hall. A floorboard creaked. Slow. Careful. Samuel stiffened. Eleanor's hand tightened around his wrist. Her eyes widened, fear flooding them both at the same time. Before either could move, the door opened. Thomas stood there, holding a candle. The light shook as his hand trembled. His eyes moved from Eleanor's face to Samuel beside her, then to the bed. The truth settled in him like a stone dropping into water. For a long moment, no one spoke. "What is this?" Thomas whispered, his voice tight. Eleanor rose from the bed, wrapping her shawl around herself. "You shouldn't be here." "I should not?" Thomas stepped closer, anger pushing aside his shock. "For years I wondered why this man was spared, why he walked free in this house at night. Now I see." Samuel stood slowly. He did not run. He did not beg. He only placed himself slightly in front of Eleanor without thinking. That single act sealed everything. Thomas laughed, short and bitter. "You'd protect her now?" Eleanor's voice broke. "This is my fault." "No," Thomas snapped. "This is wrong. Both of you." Footsteps echoed from behind. The sound of a cane striking the floor. Master Henry stood in the doorway, pale, shaking, his eyes confused but sharp enough to understand the shape of betrayal. "What is going on?" he asked. No one answered. Henry's gaze landed on Samuel, then on Eleanor. His face twisted, pain deeper than illness cutting through him. "You," he whispered to Samuel. "In my house. In my bed." Samuel bowed his head. "I never meant harm." Henry raised his cane, his arm shaking with effort. "You stole what was mine." Eleanor moved between them. "Henry, please. You were never there. You were gone long before this began." Her words struck harder than the truth itself. Henry's arm dropped. He looked suddenly small, older than his years. Thomas turned away, his mind already racing. He saw power in this moment. Control. He knew the laws. He knew what could be done. "This will not stay hidden," Thomas said coldly. "The whole plantation will know by morning." Samuel finally spoke with strength. "Punish me if you must. Leave her out of it." Thomas smiled without warmth. "You don't decide that." By dawn, whispers spread like smoke. The enslaved people felt it first, the shift in air, the tension pulling tight. Samuel was taken from the fields and locked away. Eleanor did not eat, did not sleep. She stared out the window, knowing the life she had built in darkness was ending. But the twist came that night. Master Henry collapsed. His body, already weak, could not carry the weight of what he had seen. By morning, he was gone. Death changed everything. Suddenly, Eleanor was a widow. Thomas expected swift justice, harsh and public. But Eleanor surprised them all. She stood before the household and claimed responsibility. She spoke of loneliness, of weakness, of fault. She never spoke Samuel's name. With Henry dead, the law shifted. Eleanor now held power she had never wanted. Thomas watched, stunned, as she ordered Samuel not punished, but sold away quietly to another county. It sounded like mercy. It felt like a blade. The night Samuel was taken, Eleanor watched from the window. They did not speak. They did not touch. 10 years of shared silence ended with nothing but distance between them. Neither of them knew yet that this was not the end. It was only the turning point. After Samuel was taken away, the plantation felt hollow, like a body missing a vital part. The days moved on, but something was broken beyond repair. Eleanor walked through the house like a ghost, speaking only when required, her eyes often fixed on nothing at all. To the outside world, she was the grieving widow, dressed in black, head bowed, voice soft. Neighbors came with kind words and careful looks. No one asked questions out loud, but everyone felt the tension hanging in the air. Thomas stayed close, watching every move she made, waiting for her to slip. At night, Eleanor could not sleep. She lay alone in the same bed where 10 years of quiet comfort had once lived. Now the room felt cold, too large. She replayed every moment, every choice, wondering if she had saved Samuel or ruined him. Samuel, meanwhile, was sent to a smaller farm far from the river. The work was harder, the overseer crueler. He spoke less than ever. He carried Eleanor's face in his memory like a wound that would not close. He told himself he was alive because of her, and that had to be enough. But the past does not stay buried. Thomas pushed his advantage. He began managing the plantation openly, making decisions without Eleanor's consent. He spoke to her with thin politeness, hiding his anger behind rules and order. "You owe me honesty," he said one afternoon. "I kept your secret." Eleanor met his gaze. "You kept it to protect yourself." That answer only sharpened his dislike. Rumors continued to move through the land. Some said Samuel had been the father of Eleanor's stillborn child years earlier, a loss she had never spoken of. Others said Eleanor had been cursed, truth twisted into shapes no one could recognize. Eleanor finally made a choice. One evening, she called Thomas into her study. The fire was low, shadows long. "You will stop managing this estate," she said calmly. "I will sell the land within the year." Thomas stared at her. "You can't." "I can," she replied, "and I will." This shook him more than anger ever could. The land was his future, his control. Without it, he was nothing. That same week, Eleanor began writing letters. Quiet ones, careful ones. One of them found its way to the farm where Samuel worked. The letter was short. No names, no promises. "You are alive because you were sent away. Stay that way." Samuel read it twice. He folded it and kept it close. He understood what she could not say. Winter came early that year. Eleanor fell ill, weak and burning with fever. As she drifted in and out of sleep, she called Samuel's name. The servants heard. The walls listened. Thomas saw his chance. He rode out with 2 men, claiming he needed labor returned. Samuel was taken once more, this time under false orders. He arrived at the plantation after dark, confused, frightened, and exhausted. Eleanor woke to see him standing at the foot of her bed. For a moment, neither breathed. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "I didn't choose this," Samuel replied. They did not touch. They did not need to. The past rushed between them like a storm. But Thomas was listening. The next morning, he confronted Eleanor with cold satisfaction. "You brought him back. That's enough." Eleanor sat up in bed, pale but steady. "No," she said. "You did." She revealed what Thomas had not expected. Papers, records, proof of his misuse of funds, his false orders, his lies. She had gathered them quietly, patiently. "You expose me," Thomas hissed, "and I expose you." Eleanor met his eyes without fear. "I already lost everything." The balance of power shifted again. Samuel was sent away once more, this time with legal papers granting him freedom in a distant state. Eleanor signed them with shaking hands. This time, the goodbye was final. Eleanor watched him walk away into the morning light, knowing she would never see him again. The plantation remained, but its soul was gone. What followed would echo long after both of them were gone. The years that followed were quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy instead of peaceful. The Whitmore plantation no longer felt like a place of power. It felt like a place of memory. Eleanor sold most of the land just as she had promised. Piece by piece, the wide fields were divided, the big house grew emptier, and the long rows of workers thinned. People in the county whispered that she was losing her mind, but she did not care. Every sale felt like a slow undoing of a life she no longer believed in. Thomas left soon after. His plans had failed, his control broken. He moved west, chasing new land and new power, but the shadow of his past followed him. Some men never escaped the things they tried to bury. Samuel, now free, traveled north. His freedom felt strange at first, like shoes that did not fit. He did not know where he belonged. He worked where he could, slept where he was allowed, and learned how to live without asking permission. Some nights, he still dreamed of Eleanor. Not as his mistress, not as his secret, just as a woman who once saw him as human. He never married, not because he could not, but because part of his heart stayed in Virginia, in a room lit by firelight and silence. Eleanor grew older alone. Her beauty faded gently, replaced by calm. She turned one wing of the big house into a school for the children of freed families who had settled nearby. She paid teachers. She gave books. She never spoke of her past, but her actions spoke for her. People began to see her differently, not as a broken widow, but as a quiet woman trying to fix what she could not undo. One spring morning, many years later, a letter arrived from the north. No return name, only a few simple lines. "I am alive. I am free. I remember you." That is enough. Eleanor held the letter for a long time. Her hands shook, tears fell, slow and silent. Not from sadness alone, but from release. For the first time in years, her chest felt light. She never answered the letter. Some connections do not need replies. They live in memory, not words. When Eleanor died, she was buried under an old oak tree at the edge of the land she once ruled. The grave was simple. No grand stone, no long words, just a name and 2 dates. Years later, a man passing through stopped there. He was older, with gray in his hair and calm in his eyes. He stood in silence for a long time, hat in hand. No one knew who he was, but he knew. Time has a way of softening even the sharpest truths. By the time the oak tree grew wide and strong over Eleanor's grave, the world around it had changed. Roads replaced dirt paths. New families settled on land that once knew chains and silence. Few remembered the Whitmore name, and fewer still remembered the stories whispered behind closed doors. But stories do not disappear. They move quietly, passed from one voice to another. Old men in nearby towns spoke of a widow who sold her land and taught children to read when others would not. They said she was kind but distant, as if part of her lived somewhere else. No one spoke of the enslaved man who had once walked freely through her halls at night. That part of the story stayed hidden, protected by time. Samuel lived a long life. He worked as a carpenter, known for careful hands and honest work. People trusted him. Children liked him. He never spoke of where he came from unless asked, and even then, his words were few. When he was old, he settled in a small northern town where the winters were harsh, but the people fair. On his wall hung a single letter, folded and worn. He never let anyone touch it. It reminded him that even in a cruel world, moments of truth could exist. Sometimes, late at night, he would sit by the fire and think of Virginia, not of pain, but of the quiet moments, the sound of rain on the roof, the glow of firelight, the feeling of being seen. He never blamed Eleanor. He understood her limits. He understood the world they were trapped in. Their bond was shaped by wrongs bigger than either of them, yet within it, something real had lived. As the years passed, laws changed. Chains fell away. New struggles rose in their place. Freedom came slowly, unevenly, and with cost. But it came. The plantation house eventually fell into ruin. Walls cracked. Roof caved in. Nature reclaimed what had once stood proud. Only the oak tree remained, steady and strong. People passing by sometimes rested in its shade, unaware of the lives tied to its roots. The story of Eleanor and Samuel was never written in books. It was never carved into stone. It lived only in memory, in choices made quietly, in lives altered by love that could not speak its name. And perhaps that is how some stories are meant to survive. Not loud, not celebrated, just remembered by those who felt them. Because even in the darkest times, human connection found a way to exist. And sometimes, that quiet truth is the most powerful ending of all.